In this video we are going to talk about information. We will try to clearly define what is it, we will discuss how to measure it, we will also introduce interesting concepts like information entropy, and of course we will connect everything to the world of control theory. As usual, I leave you all the link in the description, and at the end of the video please let me know what you think in the comment section below. Hi and welcome to Control Theory in Practice. Every decision-making process is always driven by the goal that you want to reach and some available information. This paradigm is ubiquitous and you can find it pretty much everywhere. For example, our body is capable to defeat viruses thanks to some information that we are stored inside, or predators decide their hunting strategy depending on what they see around, and there is even people that decide to refuse a vaccine because of... You got it right, information. If you think a little bit about that, also our life experience is essential information that we accumulated year after year, that in combination with the real-time information that we get from our surroundings shape our daily behavior. Nevertheless, despite all of us have some sort of understanding of it, what if someone asks you to clearly define it? In other words, can you firmly answer the question, what is information? If not, don't worry, we can always rely on the good Wikipedia that gives us a very interesting definition that I personally like a lot. In other words, the lower is the uncertainty, the higher is the information. Let's take this picture for example. We cannot really say what it is because there is too uncertainty in the shapes, in the lines and so on and so forth, but the more we remove the uncertainty, the more information we get, and then the more likely we can guess what it represents. So we have information and uncertainty that go pretty much like this. But the word uncertainty is tightly connected to the word probability, isn't it? I mean, an uncertain event has lower probability to happen, whereas a certain event has 100% of probability of happening. Information, uncertainty and probability. Can we connect information directly to probability? How can we do that? Well, we don't have to bother because this problem has been addressed already in the past. This guy is called Shannon and he observed that the least probable is an event, the higher is the information that it provides. What does it mean? Well, if we take for example the letter I and the letter Z of the English alphabet, then the letter I is most likely to happen into a random English word, right? So according to Shannon, letter I should provide less information than letter Z. Is it true? Well, try to guess this word. And try now. One thing that I personally find very fascinating is how us, as human beings, are instinctively attracted to events with high information, namely to events that are less likely to happen. For example, we jump on our chair when we hear something like that an old woman won a huge amount of money in the casino, but we are turned down when we hear about events that have 100% of probability to happen, like the grocery store closed tonight at 8. Or we raise our antennas when we hear that Pescara reached the qualification in Champions League rather than Juventus. I mean, they're always there, how interesting can it be? Also, why we are so attracted by horoscopes? Well, because they are always wrong. In fact, if you write down what they claim and what happened for 365 days, you'll be impressed on how wrong they are. The fact that they are correct with so low probability means that when they get it, they create a lot of information that give a shiver to our back and we tend to generalize that they are always correct. But things are not like that. Anyway, horoscopes are funny and we all read them. Now we define information and we connect it to probability. But let's add some more element. Have you ever received a voice message that was very interesting but... Come on man, you could have said that in 15 seconds, not in 15 minutes. That triggers an interesting question, because we define information, but what about the length of the message? Well, we don't have to bother about that because the same guy also addressed this problem by introducing the concept of entropy, which you can think of the information content over the length of a message. From here you can see that the longer is the message or the smaller is the information, then the entropy go down, and I am pretty sure that all of you have at least one low entropy friend. Now the concept of entropy does not apply only to WhatsApp message, of course, it's more general, and if you want to know more, I'll leave you some link in the description. Till now we talk a lot about information, but what about control theory, how it relates to it? Well, in many ways, but first of all let me remind you that control theory relies on three pillars which are goal, available information and decision making. Within this framework, we tend to spend much more focus into the decision-making phase, disregarding a little bit the other two. But this is also normal, because at the end of the day, all we want is to find the solutions to our problems, so that's normal. What control theory says that you should move the focus from the decision-making to the other two phases. Now, the problem of the goal formalization has been discussed in a previous video that you can recover on this channel, so I will focus on the information. In the trade-off between decision making and information building, the findings of control theory are quite clear. We should reduce a little bit the effort in finding the best decision, and we should spend a little bit more time for building up better information. This is the key for the success, and to be honest, this idea is not silly at all. Look for example how South Korea put the coronavirus at the bay. Instead of spending a lot of money and effort in deciding what they have to do, they invest a lot of money just for tracing, which means for building up information. And let's be frank, at the beginning we were a little bit confused about this strategy, but at the end... And what about the other countries? How much time and effort they spend for building up more information? Well, I am not really sure, but I remember that at the beginning, when they were trying to estimate the mortality rate of the virus, all they were doing was to count the number of deaths over the number of infected people. But first of all, you don't know the number of all the infected people, you only know a subset of them, namely those who have been tested. And second, when someone passes away, you don't know if it is because of the COVID, because they were old, because of some other disease, and so on and so forth. In fact, at the end, all the countries with this approach came out with very different numbers. Nevertheless, I was thinking that perhaps a more robust approach for estimating how many people were dying for the COVID was simply to compare the number of deaths, I don't know, Q2 2020 with the same period of the previous years. Or even better, one could have made a sort of data fusion between the two estimating strategies to produce more information. In the most general case, just for underlying that the idea of building up more information is not silly at all, how often you were struggling in doing some job and then someone arrived with that little information and then you were like... And what about the quality of your work product if you do only have started with a better information from the beginning? Now, one thing to mention is that you will never find the statement, oh, you have to focus on the information first in any control theory textbook, but this is implicitly written. In fact, when you pick a control strategy, you immediately see what is the information that you need in order to apply it. You can think the control strategy as the recipe and the information as the ingredients, and of course you need the ingredients first. This is the reason why control theory guys, they ask a lot of questions or they spend countless of hours for running apparently pointless experiment or in measuring things that don't seem relevant, and they end up after several weeks without having provided not even a shade of a preliminary working solution, and that can create some problem in some workplace. I have a number of personal stories about that, but I will tell you only one. Once we were in a lab for testing a new technology and the project manager wanted to run the system in automatic mode and wanted to patch the software on the fly over and over until we get something working. You know, the so-called hands-on approach that, let's be honest, it always falls short. But I was the control guy at that time and I designed a simple PI controller that I needed to tune. Now, from the textbook, for tuning a PI controller I needed to measure the time constant of the system. This means that I had to run some specific experiment in manual mode where I have to measure the time it takes for the temperature of a fluid to go from one steady state point to another steady state point in response to a specific control command. When asked to run this experiment, the project manager looked fairly upset. He was like,
listen, the lab is expensive and we have to finish our job.
But what saved me there is that we agreed beforehand that I could have spent half a day for running my weird experiment, so he let me doing that, even if he looked not very happy. Until I managed to take this time information for tuning the damn PI controller and all the oscillation were gone, the system was stable in fully automatic mode. The guy looked very confused, but at least he looked happy, so we finished our job, we succeed, yoo-hoo, let's celebrate and let's party. I wish to remark that was not my merit, I just followed the textbook that was crystal clear about the information that I needed for tuning the PI controller. Another well-established message from control theory is that perturbation on the information are way more dangerous than perturbation on the action taken. That was weird, so let's make me an example. According to control theory, it's way more dangerous that you order a number of vaccine based on a wrong information than the vaccine that you receive is not the number that you ordered. Note that the difference here is subtle, because in the first case we have a perturbation entering before the decision making phase, whereas in the second case we have a perturbation entering after we have taken a decision. And an interesting result from control theory is that the former case is typically way more dangerous than the latter case. Another interesting thing to point out is that perturbation on the information can decrease the level of the information. In fact, it's not like that once you have a certain level of information, this information cannot ever decrease. Well, actually it can. For example, if the guy opened the evening news by screaming that during November we hit a new record of COVID infection, which is even higher than during April when we have the outbreak, then you should also see that during November we were testing 6 times more people. In fact, by dividing the number of infected people by the number of tested people, in reality it seems that the virus spread was a bit lower in November. In that case, you are providing a news, but in fact you are increasing the uncertainty about the virus spread, which means that you are lowering the information about it. The thing is that news and information are not necessarily the same thing. The same principle applies between data and information. They are two different concepts. Data is just a collection of facts that alone don't say anything. Information is how you understand those facts in a given context. So we need the data for shaping information, and this is essentially the work of data scientists. A small curiosity here. The word information comes from the Latin word informare, which means to give shape to something, possibly to your mind. Before we say that the control strategy is the recipe and the information are the ingredients. But if we miss some ingredient, can we still cook some control strategy? This philosophical question pop up in the mind of many, and today control theory offers you a wide range of control techniques that you can still use even if you lack some information. For your information, the branch of control theory that deals with uncertain system is called robust control, and to be honest is one of my favorites. But what if we miss too many ingredients? Well, in that case, trivially, you cannot cook the recipe. There is really not so much to say. But interestingly here, there are a number of fields where we fail in using all the power of control theory only because the missing piece of the puzzle is information and we fail in improving it. For example, in economics, we cannot use some sort of PI-based control strategy for establishing a monetary policy because we have too large uncertainties in relating the variables that we want to control, the measurements are very generous estimate, the model is wrong, and so on and so forth. But if we manage to fill this gap, then we can use all the power of control theory that will certainly work, mathematically proven. However, the utilization of control theory shall not be regarded as a mere on-off thing. Even if you cannot use explicitly the methods offered by the textbook, that doesn't mean that you cannot face your problem with a control theory mindset, which include like putting the right amount of effort for building up information, for formalizing your control goal, for identifying your four horsemen, and so on and so forth. Now let's talk a little bit about information processing. What is that? Well, when we create some information, we also have to secure that it's understood by all the stakeholders, and to do that we may have to change its format. For example, if I have to convey some information from a guy that speaks only English, I cannot do that in Italian, but I have to convert that in English. Nevertheless, a simple way to secure that information is understood by everybody is to use a language that everybody can understand. And what is a language that everybody can understand? Well, it's English. What else? Well, in reality there is another language which is even more universal and that more people can understand. This is the language of numbers. I mean, if I say 3, 5, 7, pretty much everyone can understand, and even computer can understand that. By using numbers, you also increase automatically the level of information. I mean, if I say it's warm or it's cold, I'm giving you some information. But if I say it's 5 degrees or 35 degrees, I'm giving you more information. But now someone can say, okay, but you cannot convert anything into numbers. And this is true, but on the other hand, if you walk an extra mile, you will see that you can convert a lot of things into numbers. I will tell you another personal tale. Once we get the task of defining a target and performance for our team. Now, although someone can think in terms of mission and vision, which is not wrong, I was thinking to walk an extra mile and define something a little bit more concise and that you can measure. So I was thinking to elaborate target and performance in terms of QCD. For those who never heard that, QDC is an acronym that stands for Quality, Delivery and Cost, and there are metrics used for assessing products and processes. I'll leave you some link below. So in my mind we could have defined the desired QDC as a target and the measured QDC as performance, but how translate them into numbers? I went this way. Assume now that each team member is working on a certain project. Normally, each project expects some deliveries within a certain deadline. Assume now the team managed to deliver 2 items over 3, Luna 2 over 4, and John 1 over 2. At this point, we can simply compute the mean value of the deliveries. 0.555, or if you want 55.5%, is the delivery rate of the whole team. We can do the same for the cost. We can consider the rate of the spending over the allocated budget for all the projects. Again, we can sum up everything and we take the mean value. At this point, we have the aggregated cost of the whole team. Note that here we are slightly overspending because our index is above 1. Regarding the quality, here we assume that we are working in the software industry for simplicity, we can have a checklist where the answer can be either yes or no. Again, we count number of OK over the total number of questions and we compute the mean value over the whole deliveries. At this point, we can define target and performance fairly easily. The target is the desired value and the performance is the actual measured value that you measure as we explained before. Say that this is for Q. Then we can do the same for delivery and cost and for different quarters. Or equivalently, you can represent it in this way where you can see how performance and target change over time. Now keep in mind this representation because this is central in control and will be part of the next video. In this way we manage to cast information into numbers and you'll be surprised to see how much you can fit in it if you just think a little bit deeper. Now I'm going to give you a small life hack that you can use every time you have to take some decision based on some dataset. What we always do when we have some dataset, we just compute the average and then we move our focus in elaborating what is the best thing that we can do based on that average value. But you know that you can increase the level of information by using some standard techniques that will not require you any more data than what you already have. And the mind-blowing thing is that once you get this additional information, you may take some decisions that are completely different compared to decisions that you taken by using only the average value. Have you ever heard about variance and standard deviation? I'm going to explain you what's that. Take for example a set of people and assume that we want to establish the height of the whole set. What everybody would do is, as said, to measure the heights one by one and then take the mean value. Period. But we can also do this thing. We take the first person and we measure how far he is from the mean value, then we square the result and then we move to the next person until we arrive to the last person and then we divide everything by the total number of people. We get the so-called variance and if we take the square root then we get the standard deviation that gives us a flavor of how much a random person picked in the set could be far away from the mean value. Note that variance and standard deviation only give you a flavor on how far the elements are spread around the mean value, not an exact number. But still, this is precious information. In fact, if we take this other set of people and we repeat exactly the same operation, then we have exactly the same mean value, but the variance is larger, as one would expect. So, to make a small recap, here we have two groups of people with the same average height. But the people height spread around the average value is larger in the second group, which means that the second group has a larger standard deviation. Now, if you apply the concept of variance and standard deviation to our QDC example, this is what we get. We have the average team delivery, which is 0.555. We compare this with the delivery rate of team, which is 2 over 3, and then we square the result, then we move to Luna, and finally to John. At this point we divide everything by the number of people in the team, and we get the variance. We take the square root, and we get the standard deviation. This standard deviation is very low, and that means that all the resources are delivering pretty much with the same rate, which is about 55%. For the cost we do the same. We take the average cost and then we compare it to the first cost, we square it and we move to the second and then to the third project. We divide everything by the total number of the project and voila, here is the variance. Square root and standard deviation. Now the standard deviation here is fairly high, it is almost 1, telling us that there are projects underspending quite a lot and projects overspending quite a lot, in spite of a mean value around 1, meaning that in average we are not overspending or underspending. But as you have seen, the standard deviation is pretty high. Now that you understood the game, you can do the same for quality. As you have seen, computing only the mean value or making the additional step of computing also the variance and the standard deviation change things like the day and night. And based on that, we can even claim that Bukowski was a great writer, but he was not super in statistics. In fact, if you put your head in the oven and your feet in the fridge, then you may have a reasonable average body temperature. But if you compute the standard deviation, then this standard deviation will have high values indicating that you would have some part of your body burning and some other part freezing. Therefore, if Bukowski knew a little bit about statistics, I don't think that you never come with this claim. So yes, statistics give you good information, but you should know how to interpret that. Anyway, nobody's perfect, and I still believe that Bukowski was a great writer. We arrive to the conclusion, and what we have seen so far, other than Bukowski? Well, a lot of things, like for example, we define what is information, we connect it to probability, we introduce the concept of entropy, we connect information to control theory, and so on and so forth. So what is the conclusion? Well, the conclusion is that information is way too underrated, period. I mean, in theory we all agree that information is important, that we have to consider that and so on and so forth, but in practice we don't do. We should spend a little bit more effort for increasing the level of information before we take any decision. The only thing left out is that someone now may complain that, okay, we say that control theory is the recipe and information are the ingredients. But if you don't tell us how to get those ingredients, then all this control theory thing sounds like, I don't know, a theoretical fairy tale. Well, in reality things are a little bit different. In fact, this problem has been addressed in the past, and today control theory offers you a large toolset that include filters, Fourier transforms, observers, and so on and so forth, that help you in getting better information. But yes, you need information in numerical format. These tools will be discussed in the next video, where we will move also a little bit toward the engineering world, because at the end control theory was born for solving engineering problems, so why not? But this does not mean that non-engineers that are watching right now could not find that useful. Therefore, if you haven't done it yet, please consider to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and like, share, comment, and so on and so forth. What else to say? Thank you for today, and see you next time.